Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 29th of July 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, two grown men have fight over Twitter. The head of Eidos Montreal resigns, although he's not going quietly. The developers of Warframe say that they are reconsidering porting the game to Xbox One, and the Ouya has a 27% attachment rate. We'll speculate on what that means a little bit later on in the show. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Phil Fish has claimed that he will be leaving game development as a whole, and the Polytron Twitter account confirms that Fez 2 has in fact been cancelled. The full reasons behind this are unclear, however, this followed a rather large blow-up between Phil Fish and a character by the name of the Annoyed Gamer, aka Mr. Marcus Beer, who works for Game Trailers, after Mr. Beer referred to Phil Fish in his show Invisible Walls as a hipster, a wanker, a fucking asshole, and a tosspot. Now, as much as I would encourage the use of the word tosspot in regular language because it's hilarious, it turns out that Phil Fish was not especially happy with this, since it was also accompanied by a request from Marcus Beer that other media outlets boycott future releases by Phil Fish and Jonathan Blow. This was apparently due to the fact that they refused to comment on a rumor about indie publishing on the Xbox One. The response from Phil Fish was colourful, to say the least, which culminated in him telling Mr. Marcus Beer to compare his life to Fish's and then kill himself, which was later supposedly revealed to be a quote from Futurama, but as far as I can tell, the intent was still to ask a person to kill himself, so this is possibly not the best idea ever. Rather more importantly, the result of this appears to be that Fez 2 has been cancelled and Phil Fish will be leaving game development, as the Polytron website and Twitter confirmed that the game is no longer actually being made. My first reaction when thinking about covering this was to just finish by saying nope and just go straight on to the next segment. That would have been a very easy way of doing things, I feel, and it would have avoided pretty much any kind of conflict, but I don't like the easy ways. They're always the dullest, or the most boring. However, I would like to try something a little bit difficult, which seems to be something that no one else has attempted before, which is to actually talk about something important rather than talk about the people in question. This is going to sound a little bit arrogant here, but I would like to give you a little quote from Socrates, if you don't mind. It's quite a good quote. I think it should apply to more things on the internet. Strong minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, weak minds discuss people. Unfortunately, this is something that media in general has a problem with for whatever reason. It has also infected the games journalism scene, sadly enough, which is quite strange considering we all live behind monitors and we're very much focused on pixely people as opposed to real people. Yet we seem to want to discuss the real people far more. I'm really not entirely sure why that is. I want to talk about the relationship between media and developers. I use the words gaming media rather than games journalists with very good reason. The problem with games journalism these days is that the term appears to be loaded. It's also rather vague and a little bit nebulous, because it seems like it can apply to pretty much anything. I try and avoid being called a games journalist because I feel it has certain connotations, and more importantly, it actually has a certain level of expectation. There's a set of standards there, or at least there should be. I don't necessarily know if that's actually true. I don't know if there is really a set of standards that's being applied at all, but there should be. If there isn't, there bloody well should be. I suppose games journalism can get away with it, considering that other forms of journalism these days seem to be leaning more and more towards the sensationalistic, and of course the focus on the person, as opposed to the focus on the story, so it's not like the standards we have to live up to are all that high. But I consider myself at best a critic, at worst a pundit, and honestly the best term I think would just be commentator. I generally don't go investigating, I don't go and dig up stories, I comment on existing ones, and I comment on existing games, and that's kind of what I do, and that's about it. It's a bit of a weird position to be in because the old guard of gaming media operates in a different way in some respects to, say, YouTube commentators, but there are other aspects in which they are very, very much the same. The relationship between the gaming media and publishers and developers is a two-way street. It is very much a synergistic relationship. One relies on the other, but it's to greater or lesser extents depending on the publisher and depending on the form of media. Activision does not, in fact, rely on Joe Blow Blogger to get the word out about its titles. In fact, more often than not, it would prefer if they weren't involved at all, because they tend to meddle with their carefully laid marketing plans. These are companies that spend sometimes more on the marketing of a title than they do on the development of it, and really would prefer if you didn't muck about with that. They would actually like their message to be unsullied, to go out in the exact form that they put it out and without any meddling. So games media tends to get in the way of that, unless of course they are just posting the actual content itself, which more often than not they actually do. The more important aspect to consider, though, is the idea that games media relies on pre-release review copies of titles, and in return, there is the expectation that a review will be put out in the most honest way possible. Again, depending on who it is, depends on who holds all the cards. When it comes to major publishers, they are the ones that hold all the cards. It's essentially games media lining up to beg for scraps and trying to get hold of pre-release review copies, because if they don't do that, then they get less traffic. That's just the reality of the situation. If you get out a review earlier, you get rewarded with more traffic, because people actually don't really care where it comes from. They just want to read the first review. They want to know everything they can about this game that they are curious about, and they'll go anywhere to get that, regardless of the perceived quality of that particular piece of journalism. The flip side of that is that when you are an indie developer that doesn't have a marketing budget, you are trying to get the gaming media to actually cover your title, and that's where the power switches hands. Yeah, the shoe goes onto the other foot. Unfortunately, it seems like some games media have taken it upon themselves to exact a toll in that respect. It's almost like they're taking out the frustrations they have with major publishers on smaller developers and making absurd claims like, well, we should all boycott this and we'll see how well you do without games media. That's not a particularly healthy attitude to take. Perhaps it's out of character for me to say this, but I take a fairly positive view when I look at the purposes of games media and games developers. They're both actually working towards the same goal, which is to better the gaming industry in the way that they see fit. Whether it be to release a game that they feel will contribute to the whole, or will actually enrich the game scene, or whether it be to promote such a title themselves, or write a piece that is critical about a particularly poor business practice. Maybe the purpose of that is to protect the consumer. Sometimes it's to protect the developer. It really comes down to the situation at hand. There is unfortunately a rather large amount of inter-industry squabbling. I think it's just because as an industry we haven't really grown up yet. We haven't been around long enough to have set those standards in place. We have a set of unwritten rules. We have perhaps some expectations, but we don't really have a firm constitution or anything along those lines. The thing about gaming media as well is that it's not really clearly defined. I mean, I've got a lot of people that call me a reviewer when I repeatedly reject any assertion that I am that, because I feel that reviews have a certain set of standards and that there are criteria that you have to fulfill in order to actually be a reviewer. And I don't think I fulfill those criteria, but I'll be honest, every now and again, I'll go and read actual reviews, and I look at them and I'm like, wow, this is all you need to do to be considered a reviewer? I should just slap a score on this and get myself on Metacritic. A little bit of extra traffic for me. But no, I think principles matter a little bit more in that respect. The thing is that people will consume the media that they like. Yeah, they don't really care about these high-minded ideas. What they care about is whether or not they think something's informative, honest, or entertaining, or any combination of those three. There's a pretty nice quote from Jonathan Blow on that one, which is, people will get the quality of gaming journalism that people support. Yeah, I mean, this is very much a traffic-driven industry. That's the way that it works. The way we get paid is through ad revenue, and that's really the only honest way to do it. Would you prefer that this kind of content was sponsored by games developers and publishers? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't, because that would compromise the perceived honesty and integrity of the content itself, and that means that you might not get an honest impression, so you may be misled. Not an ideal scenario, is it? The problem comes, I think, from calling someone like Marcus Beer a games journalist. I don't honestly feel that he is, having watched his content. I view him very much as a pundit, and that's really about it. That's fine, by the way. It's actually okay to be a pundit. That's not really a big deal, but when games journalism's integrity is called into question because Marcus Beer said something bad, I think that really we're kind of missing the point here. Games journalism is not one big homogenous whole. There's this perception, I suppose, that games journalism closes ranks to protect its own. In my experience, no, it doesn't. I've got into plenty of spats with people supposedly in the same industry as me, but those kind of people don't view me as being in the same industry because I don't write. Yeah, I do YouTube videos, which is regarded by many people, including publishers, to be a lesser form of gaming media. But it seems that it would be the more popular form of gaming media right about now. People will get the quality of gaming journalism that they support, after all. At the end of the day, I feel that this helps absolutely nobody. Nobody won from this situation. Having Fez 2 cancelled is not a good thing. Having Phil Fish not developing video games anymore is not a good thing. Having games journalism broad-stroked as a result of this particular situation is also not a good thing. It's a big, gigantic mess, and it's horrendous to actually wade into or even spectate from the sidelines. I could probably go on for hours about this, but this is only a 20-minute or so show, and I'd like to leave you with a particular quote. Something I think everyone in this industry, including consumers, should bear in mind from time to time. In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read, but the bitter truth we critics must face is that, in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. The former head of Eidos Montreal, who I am no doubt going to mispronounce, Stefan Dastrus, possibly? That sounds about right, has resigned from his position citing irreconcilable differences. In a statement made to Develop, he claimed that the company suffered from a lack of leadership, courage, and communication, and that he was not able to do his job properly as a direct result. This would appear to encompass Square Enix Europe, the publisher, as well as the company Eidos Montreal. In his statement, he says, "Since last year's financial shortcoming performance of Square Enix Europe, we, the HQ in London, and the general management of Eidos Montreal, have had growing and divergent opinions on what needed to be done to correct the situation. The lack of leadership, lack of courage, and a lack of communication were so evident that I wasn't able to conduct my job correctly. I realized that our differences were irreconcilable and that the best decision was unfortunately to part ways." Strangely enough, he didn't in fact leave the company and is now working with a fellow by the name of Darrell Gallagher, the head of studios, and is focusing on cross-studio operations. So there is the possibility that instead of just kind of abandoning ship entirely, he's decided to do what he can to right it. It's just incredibly sad. It really, really is. I mean, looking at studios, I generally view Eidos Montreal and indeed Square Enix in a very positive light. They have done an awful lot of good things for the PC industry over the past few years. Square Enix has been surprisingly supportive of it and has also been making sure that good ports have been coming our way on a fairly consistent basis. Unfortunately, especially considering the revelations regarding Thief, which might actually end up being a goddamn disaster, considering that there are far too many cooks attempting to cook that particular cauldron of broth, and they definitely disagree on how to do it. The company pretty clearly needs to get its act together. So does Square Enix, I might add, taking a lot of very questionable decisions as of late, consistently complaining about underperforming titles after vastly overestimating the number of games that it would actually sell. I think that this is certainly the vanguard of an awful lot more of this kind of stuff. We will find the larger development houses trying to clean up their act, as it were, and as we go into the next generation, I think we will see who manages to survive and who ends up going under due to old expectations and old business practices. We do need to tighten our belts just a little bit. We are talking about an industry that is spending unprecedented amounts of money on making video games and is not getting the money back that they were expecting. I hope that we come out of this a better industry, frankly. I think that there's an awful lot of industries that have gone through this kind of thing before, but of course there will be casualties along the way. I just hope that Eidos Montreal is not one of them. Reactions continue to come in to the decision by Microsoft to allow self-publishing on the Xbox One. We don't know as of yet the exact details as to how it's going to work, but several studios have reacted, including Warframe, that was pushed as one of the premier free-to-play launch titles for the PlayStation 4. The developer Digital Extremes has spoken about the Xbox One before and said that while it would like to be on the machine, it really wasn't sure about it because of the lack of self-publishing capability. They would have had to go with a publisher, which evidently they didn't want to do. However, since Microsoft has now announced self-publishing, the VP of Publishing for the digital extremes firm Meredith Brown has said that they are happy to see Microsoft shift the attitude and that they'd be silly not to consider Warframe for Xbox One now. I mean, it's hard not to see this as a blow for PlayStation 4 and Sony, honestly, because this was considered a bit of a premium free-to-play exclusive for them. Warframe's a really good game, and I think that kind of co-op experience is something that taps quite nicely into the desires of a lot of console gamers these days. Warframe is not a game that needs to be on PC in order to perform correctly. You could very easily play it with a controller. In fact, it would play just fine. The aiming might be a little bit off, but of course they will adjust that for the console, so that really won't be too big a deal. Since the game does not have a competitive mode, the auto-aim shouldn't be a factor either. But the strong lineup of free-to-play and ports for the PlayStation 4 was one of the selling points for Sony, which, let's be honest and talk about the elephant in the room here, doesn't seem to have that many strong exclusives in comparison to the Xbox One at this stage. It was pretty much the only thing they were really losing out on. The launch lineup of a new machine is always a concern, always, because it limits the number of machines that get sold on launch in the first place. We end up in a situation where if you don't have a strong launch lineup and then strong support afterwards, then you become the Wii U and nobody buys games for you. It slows the adoption rate and it slows the transition between the two systems. At this point, that's especially important because for the first time in a couple of generations, we do not have a lot of backwards compatibility. The PlayStation 4 and Xbox One do not have that. PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, and of course the PlayStation 2, they had that kind of capability. There also seems to be a feeling that outside of hardcore gamers, there isn't enough of a difference between the capabilities of an Xbox 360 and an Xbox One to really push people into getting it. You compare a 360 to an Xbox or a PlayStation 2 to a PlayStation 3, I feel the jump is bigger. And I think it's mostly down to the fact that you get diminishing returns the further you go in terms of graphical fidelity. PlayStation 1 versus PlayStation 2, yeah? Look at The Bouncer, one of the early titles for the PlayStation 2. Compare it to any PlayStation 1 game and tell me you can't see a massive difference. Now, compare the 360 version of, say, Call of Duty Ghosts to the Xbox One version and tell me, straight-faced, that your average viewer would see such a gigantic gap. They probably wouldn't. And I think this is going to become a problem as we go further and further on when it comes to advancing graphical technology. This, I think, is maybe going to be the biggest factor that keeps people from switching over. And as a result, it's going to come down to the experiences that are available there. I think that's really positive, actually. I really, really do. Instead of who's got the shiniest graphics, it's going to be who has the best games. That's wonderful. What a great attitude. And I think perhaps Sony have been banking on keeping a hold of these larger free-to-play titles as well as their link to the indies. The thing is, most independent developers are not just going to sit around and be on one machine when they know they can make money with both. So I have to wonder how many of these games that were announced as PlayStation 4 exclusives will end up being so as a result of this change in policy from Microsoft. We'll of course learn a little bit more about how it's going to work at Gamescom at the end of August. And finally, the CEO of the Ouya Corporation, Julie Ehrman, spoke to The Verge about the attachment rate that Ouya currently has when it comes to people that own the console actually buying a game on the system. She claimed that 27% of owners have actually purchased a game, and stated that, I think there's a lot of social and mobile app developers that would kill for an 8% attach rate on a platform that's 30 days old. These numbers will grow as more gamers pick up the console and as we attract more developers. I believe that by the end of the year, we'll see a few developers telling us they've made more than $1 million on the Ouya platform. This follows up from comments a few days ago that were very much mixed by developers, with some claiming to be highly successful on the console and others claiming it wasn't even worth the time to port the game to the machine in the first place. Now, I'm going to be entirely frank here, I do not agree with Julie's assessment of the attachment rate. You can say, I think a lot of social and mobile app developers would kill for that kind of attachment rate. Would they? Alright, well, yes, you're probably right, they would, but you're talking about free-to-play, and I think that there's a big misconception. Either that, or there's a deliberate attempt to misrepresent the machine as a free-to-play platform. It isn't. It's not a free-to-play platform at all. It is a platform that requires the offering of an incomplete version of the game, a trial version. This is not free-to-play. These are demos. This is nothing new. This has been going on for a while. Xbox Live has pretty much required that for the longest time when it comes to Xbox Live Arcade games. That doesn't make the platform a free-to-play platform. These are not free-to-play games. You look at stuff like Towerfall, you look at stuff like Oregon Trail, Final Fantasy, and all this stuff that's actually on this platform. Do any of these games use a free-to-play model? No, they don't, because that's not what a free-to-play model is. That kind of attachment rate on actual free-to-play games on, say, an iOS or Android device, yeah, that attachment rate would be fantastic, but that's not what you're talking about. Those games are designed to get the largest possible appeal to the largest possible audience, and then they rely on the small number of people that do pay to subsidize those that don't, and they design their game around the idea that paying makes it more fun. Yeah, and this has become a thriving industry on those platforms. Of course, it's also on PC as well, although we tend to have significantly higher standards when it comes to what we'll accept and what we won't with the free-to-play business model. But these games on Ouya don't have that business model. You get a 27% attachment rate on a bunch of demos. And when you look at it that way, that's not actually that good. So only 1 in 4 people that own this console have actually bought a game on it. Yeah, they've played their way through a bunch of demos and decided to buy none of them. Or alternatively, they didn't buy the Ouya for that in the first place. They purchased it to be a cheap media box or an emulation box, and emulation is not going to be making Ouya much money, is it? No, it's not really going to be making anybody money. I'm quite interested to know exactly how much the Ouya is making every time they sell a console. That's not information I was able to find, unfortunately. I wonder just how reliant the system is on purchasing games over the Ouya's digital platform, yeah? Because we know that Ouya takes 30%. How reliant are they on that money? How much profit is the machine making? Could they not sell a single game and still be a successful company? Not a clue. No idea. And then, of course, what's the concern for those developing for the system? 27% attachment rate, guys. Yeah, but if you're developing for that system, you need people to buy your game because you don't use a free-to-play model. You put out a demo, and then only 1 in 4 people actually purchase a game at all. We're not talking about 27% of people that play this demo purchase it. No, not at all. Nimble Quest had 6,508 downloads and 122 purchases, so 1.8% attachment rate. Oregon Trail, 501 sales, 13,000 downloads, 3.8% attachment rate. It doesn't take much to scrape the varnish off those figures to very clearly see that this information is being very much manipulated, in my opinion. If this was a true free-to-play console, and if you were getting that kind of attachment rate on free-to-play games, great. But you're not. You're getting a lot of people downloading a bunch of demos and then not buying anything. That's not good. Alright folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. We haven't had something heavy for a while. We've been doing the whole chilled out lounge theme. Let's change that around, shall we? A track by Lashmush. This is from the Badass Boss Themes album, available on ocremix.org. What will you find here? All sorts of great stuff, including this one. This is the Nightmare or Shadow Battles theme from Zelda Link's Awakening, and the name of the remix is Lights Out. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and I will see you next time.